Thank you for joining us, everyone. My name's Chaz Sumners, and I'm an education specialist here at Foundations, Inc. Welcome to our Beyond the Conference webinar series. Today, we have Andrew Francis and Hillary Jones from Foundations, and we'll be getting started shortly. But before we do, though, I'd like to give you a little background about Foundations and what we do here. So, we are an educational nonprofit located in Mount Laurel, New Jersey, and our mission is to improve the quality of education by building the skills of educators. We work across the school day with after school programs, schools, districts, and states to create a brighter future for every child every single day. So, if you're interested in learning more about what Foundations does, you can follow us on our various social media platforms, and we'll be dropping those in the chat for you. You may already know us from our signature professional learning experience, the Beyond School Hours Conference, which this year just wrapped up in sunny Orlando, Florida, and it was lovely. So, next year, we will be back in Orlando from March 1st to the 4th, and we would love to have you all as our guests. Come enjoy that Florida sun and get some really great best practices, but also some really actionable strategies that you can go implement in your program immediately. So now, I'd like to introduce today's facilitators. Mm. Actually, you know what? They have so much experience and such a breadth of knowledge that me introducing them does them a bit of a disservice. So let's have them introduce themselves. Andrew, do you want to start?
Thank you, Shaz. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Andrew Francis, and I am the Director of Evaluation Services here at Foundations, Inc. I've been at Foundations for a little over 5 years, and throughout that period, I've been able to support OST, Auto School Time programs, in terms of a variety of technical assistance areas, but also serving as a local evaluator for several programs and supporting overall continuous improvement and quality improvement activities as well. Happy to bring that experience, but also previous experience working in youth development and in the school system as well, particularly in Jamaica, and to be with you guys today to learn from you as well. So welcome everybody, and I'm going to turn it over to Hillary to share as well.
Thanks. So I'm Hillary Jones. I'm the Director of Professional Learning at Foundations, and I have the privilege of working with programs, with practitioners all across the nation, helping them identify solutions that work for them in their context. Prior to coming to work at Foundations, I ran programs myself for a number of years, as well as have a background in ESL, English, Spanish. So I'm happy to be here today, Chaz.
Absolutely. And we are happy to have both of you and your broad range of expertise. So, before we jump in, just so you know, this webinar will be archived on our website and YouTube, so you'll be able to access it later. So, without further ado, we're going to jump into our questions because we had a lot of amazing questions from, program leaders just like you guys. So, that being said, if you have questions that you'd like to see addressed, you can drop them in the chat and we'll be happy to address them. If you think of something later, feel free to reach out to us on social media and we can address it in the next part of our series. So, speaking of these awesome questions, I wanted to start with one about leadership. It's sort of one that we've heard different derivations of from a lot of different people, but as leaders, what really keeps you up at night, right? Like, what are those things that you noodle around with and you should be on your off time, but you're not because you're still thinking about that kind of problem?
So for me, I put that in three categories. It could be more, but we think about it, students, staff, families for the most part as a program leader, within that context
Mm,
of auto school time programming. You're thinking about, but for me, you look at reflecting on my experiences, students who probably are in your program who are having difficulties, they're struggling academically, probably struggling social, emotionally, they're having behavioral challenges. But you're also thinking about, I'd say I've thought a lot about, in cases where the program I inherited, one of the programs I inherited, there were low attendance numbers. And so that keeps you up at night thinking about how am I going to, spend some time or what strategies am I going to use to improve attendance, but also improve participation. And with that, that transcends to also, staff that may be struggling themselves in terms of dealing with their own personal issues, but also struggling with meeting the requirements of the job, but also staff that are doing exceptionally well. And for them, they're probably overworking themselves.
Yeah.
And you're thinking about, how do I help them to achieve balance, but also how do I invest in them and allow them to recognize that my optimal goal is for them to do very well at what they're doing, but also for them to become better versions of themselves. Because everything I have, I'm going to pour it into them. And with that, with families, they also have, their challenges, but also their successes and their desires that they communicate, and that keeps you thinking, keeps the wheels of your brain turning as to how do you make right for all of those subgroups. But that's for the most part how I feel in terms of what has kept me up in the night as a program leader.
So you all should know that Andrew and I got the chance to see the questions that were submitted online anyway in advance of this session. And so I wrote down two things, Andrew, and they sound very much like your two things. One is I wrote down my people. And the people they're the students, the staff, the families, right? They're the ones who are impacted by the things that we do or don't do every day. My second answer, though, was quality solutions. I think as practitioners, we try to come up with a lot of solutions. We throw a lot of things kind of to the wall and see what sticks. And I want to be somebody and spend time thinking about what it looks like to find a solution that is going to work and how to do it intentionally so that it's not just throwing things against the wall and seeing what sticks. Because I think that for me, when we do that, I see the negative impact it has on the people part of it. And so I want to be somebody who says, like, hey, listen, how do we figure out what these quality solutions are and be intentional around that?
And that's so important what Ilya is sharing, because I keep this in the back of my mind every time I go to design a program or to review a program that's been implemented, or even just implement a program as a program leader myself. That the last comment about quality solutions, and it's something that I learned from a lecturer at university level. He says that as we design interventions, we ask ourselves a question: is this intervention, is this program, is this activity, is it necessary? Number one, but also, is it sufficient to accomplish the goal or to meet the needs? And that's something that can keep you up, because and if we as leaders think about that more, but also share that with our program staff, then that goes into their planning to think about, okay, do I really need this activity, or do I need to get rid of it, and to achieve the quality goals? And if I implement this activity or this task, will it be sufficient to achieve my intended goal or purpose?
And I think that's part of why it keeps us up at night, Andrew, is because the quick short-term solutions are the things that I find myself figuring out during the day, because I have to solve that thing right this moment. But those quality solutions, they're longer term. And that's why it's the stuff that spins in my brain at night, because it's the stuff that I often find myself not either making time or having time to think about it during the day.
See, that's really interesting. And as I hear you both give your answers, it sort of sounds like, because we're talking about partially the human element, right? We want to make sure we're supporting our families and our staff, but then we also want to talk about how we're dealing with those like higher level problems. And that very often involves getting all of those human element pieces together, getting them all in one room and saying, hey, listen, this is the problem that we're facing as a program, and we're all part of this program. So how can we solve those things together, right? So that's tricky. And then supporting your staff through that journey of being able to, be trained enough to actually implement the programming that you're talking about. So on that note, how do you ensure that you meet the diverse learning needs of your employees, so that there's accountability to perform it still, right? You want to make sure that they're learning and growing, but you also want to make sure that they're being held accountable, and to your programming. So how do we do that?
Sure. So the first thing I will say is that is very difficult to do. And it's mostly difficult because of the limited resources that we have in our programs. Because ensuring that we're meeting learning needs of everybody in our program requires us to not use a one-size-fits-all training approach. And that takes time and money and investment and all those things.
Yeah.
It will only happen if you take time to make a plan around what you're going to do. If you decide, hey, I'm going to offer options, I'm just going to put them out there, it's not going to happen. But instead, if you look at those specific needs for individual employees and then determine how you're going to move forward in collaboration with those employees, ideally, right, that gives you the opportunity to do that effectively. Now, I also am a strong believer that professional development is only one way to support adult learning and adult development, right? That coaching, that mentorship, that modeling, that feedback loops are also very important parts of that process. And so those are ways that even though they still take the time and energy investment, can help you overcome the barrier of, well, now do I need 5 different professional development or training options for my people in order to make sure that their needs are really met. But if you don't have a plan around it, it will not happen.
Yeah, and I want to add that with having the best plan, it really boils down to also having good relationships.
Yeah.
I often say that the power of life is in relationships, and so best laid plans will fall if we don't have the relationship structure in place to implement those plans. And so it's critical that the people that you're working with, as Hillary mentioned, that they understand that, listen, we are in this partnership as well. We're in this relationship to achieve the best that we can. I have your best interest at heart as a program leader. This is probably easier said than done, because sometimes there are strains in the relationship between a program leader and a staff. But how do we get to a point where we can say, hey, we may not be seeing eye to eye on these things, but we have a role to play, and we're going to have to find a way to function, right? Of course, we want to go through different steps to restore and to resolve those issues. But sometimes it takes time, and so with that, you build a relationship, and with that, I'm big on what I call individual work plans, IWPs, which is something that not only on a weekly basis, but as a program leader, when I just got into working in auto school time, I recognized that the staff were directionless. They had a job description. They kind of had an idea of what they need to do from a job description, but they had not strategically worked out how they were going to not just be involved in the day-to-day operations, but to think long-term as to, okay, everything that I'm doing, how does it, lead to, the greater good? And so we would have those individual work planning sessions, essentially, with the kitchen staff, with a program leader, with a site coordinator who was leading aside, and we work through this plan of setting them some SMART goals, some objectives, but also working through that daily, weekly, monthly. What does that look like? What does that look like for you? And what's going to be some of the things that we'd like to see, essentially. So once we've set that forward, they know that we'll have check-ins, whether it's your weekly check-in, but also strategically, we're looking at the work plan, whether every quarter, to see as well how is it that you're progressing towards that. And simply put, it takes just getting up out of that office space that you have, put aside the food orders, put aside whatever it is, and just be there with people as they're implementing program activities with kids.
Andrew, I think for somebody, we don't really know the background of this question or why it got asked, but the thing to me that stands out is that if you're going to consider that accountability around performance, you have to spend time in the places where those people are working. And it is really easy to get caught behind your desk. It is really easy to get caught on your to-do list. It is really easy to get caught on callbacks and forms and reporting. But we have to stay in program spaces so that we can give and have those conversations.
And so even before kids came into the program space, we have that high level structure in place, but daily we had what we call our program meeting, which was just about 50 minutes before, just say, okay, this is what we're going to do. So they felt that, they feel that as a programmer, you are with them. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? You're going over what the expectations are, but they're also able to articulate that to you as well. Despite your workload, you carve out that 15 minutes.
Mhm.
15 minutes a day with your staff makes a world of a difference.
I love that. Reinforcing that intentionality
Yep.
behind all of that,
Mhm.
making sure that like we're all on the same page as far as our mission. We might disagree, we might have, some different views about how things should be going in program, but making sure that we all realize that we're here for the kids and we have the same mission. That's awesome. And then that helps reinforce those relationships and not just with your staff, right? But also like that helps reinforce those relationships with families too. And sometimes, you run into families where we might not agree on how things are going, but we know that we're on the same page, right? We know that we're all here for the kids. So in that vein, we do have another question about parents and families and like what kind of happens sometimes in that case. So this question says, I have parents who are unhappy and are sending me emails and messages at all hours. How can I create boundaries for myself without negatively impacting my relationship with families or the program?
That's interesting because I stepped into a program where parents were very distraught, or they needed to be reassured.
Sure.
They need communication, but also just even drawing back from my experience working as a school community relations officer before, where one of the key goals was to build relationships with parents and to close that gap between families and schools. You have to I think it's one that you have to set boundaries. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yes, we know that many of you are supermen and superwomen, right?
Mhm.
Changing the world as we have tried to, but I recall moments, Charles, Hillary, when you feel this heaviness, this weight, as if
Yeah.
you're carrying the entire world of your program and every family, every parent, every child on your shoulders, but also those higher up as well.
Mhm.
But it's important that you set some boundaries, for your work-life balance in terms of, when do you respond to those text messages? Of course, you may have to screen. And I realized that there's a point in where every message that came in, I just responding. I'm like, step back. Let's assess the risk level of this message. You want to be responsive, right? But it could be, I've gotten your message, I'm looking into the matter, and I'm going to get back to you. But it's something that's more of a higher risk. A child probably got hit, or a child got a scrape or something, or a child says that, listen, there's just a moment of disagreement between myself and another a child in the program or a staff. You want to respond to those, invite them. So invite them to have a conversation with you as well. It could be, can I call you now, depending on the time of the day? Can I call you tomorrow morning? Can I call you tomorrow afternoon? Is it possible at pick up? We can talk. But it started for us setting those limits in terms of being able to screen, to triage, in terms of how are you gonna respond to say, hey, I've gotten this, right? So that the communication loop can be closed. But in terms of your action plan, you got to work that through with them, so you don't lose that parent, you don't lose that family,
Right.
but also you preserve that relationship with them as well.
Yeah. I agree with all those things. I'm going to be real practical. So number one is that the more frequently parents hear from you and get responses from you, the less stress, anxiety, and concern you'll get from them about getting responses from you. So that means we need to find mechanisms to make us easily accessible to parents. My very practical solution when I was running programs was I had a Google phone number so that they could text or call me whenever.
I like that.
Okay. And it did two things for me. One, it let me protect my own phone number because I had some very clear boundaries that were communicated to families about when I was not available. Looking back, I wish I had been even more like
I'm sure we all feel that.
Yes.
like I said to families between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. you cannot reach me.
Yeah.
Okay. And you cannot reach me on Sunday. Okay. And my exception to that would be if I had kids on an overnight trip, if I had kids, out on a Sunday trip, but besides that, those were my boundaries. They were very clear. I had my Google number as well as my email set up with an out of office during those hours
Mm,
so that parents got an immediate reminder
mm,
of what they could or could not, like that they could not reach me. But it also meant that I texted parents all the time about like the silly little things,
mm,
right? It meant the kid who came in from school and just like said that their head hurt. Hey, just wanted you to know so and so, said that their head hurt. It meant, hey, the site coordinator just called me about snacks today at this site. So I texted that whole group of parents like, hey, just letting you know, we're, going to have 3 snacks today, but dinner has not been delivered yet. And we're making plan B. So the menu's been changed, right?
Mhm.
Like those kind of communications happened really frequently
Mhm.
because when parents heard from me and knew I was accessible in those moments, that it also allowed for them to feel confident that I was going to reply to them in those like bigger issues.
Mhm.
Um, but I'll say one more thing. There are moments where those emergencies are life and death. Like there are those moments. And if you are in the place or in a role where you may be the recipient of those messages,
Mhm.
making sure you have a plan around how those things can be communicated to you. Um, and so I ran one facility that had 24-hour staffing. There was access to that facility 24 hours. And so the staff who were there 24 hours knew how they could reach me even between my 10 p.m. and 6 a.m.
Sure.
Right. And they could call my real phone number and they knew I would answer in those life and death. Hey, the police are here. They're looking for this kid. They want to know who they left with today. They want to know, those kinds of real emergencies
Mhm.
that happen when you're working with young people. And so I don't want to negate that those pressures are real. But if you don't set at least some clear boundaries with your families, you will burn out. And we need people like you in this
Yeah,
work.
that's it.
All of
Stay
you on this
engaged.
webinar, we
Yeah.
need you here in this work. And so set yourself some clear boundaries. Figure out the ways to draw those lines. Be practical in your solutions. And then when you're on, be as communicative as you can.
I love that. You gotta set boundaries. You gotta take care of yourself, protect your own peace. Because if you're frazzled, you can't help anybody,
Mhm.
right? Speaking of which, and we kind of talked about this when we talked about making sure that we were like not stuck behind our desk and being present out in front of program. But we have another question about like how you support a team when you also have this huge workload when it comes to like that leadership responsibility, right? But how do we make sure that we're supporting our team in the day to day and then also supporting their ongoing professional development needs?
So, as I mentioned before, one, in supporting your team, I think 80% of the work is planning. We've got to
Sure.
carve out some space and time to plan, in terms of not just some of the individual work plans for our staff, but also planning as to what activities we're going to be doing when and who'll be doing what, but also give the staff an opportunity for them to be engaged in that planning as well. Often, we feel more comfortable as a leader that if I do this, I know exactly what's going to be done. It's going to be done how I want it to be done, but give them that opportunity to be able to be a part of the planning, and then you can support them. Thereafter. A big part of that is knowing what resources people need to be able to implement those activities, and that sometimes I know depending on what your program may be. It's got flagged a number of times when you step into a space and you learn that, hey, it takes this amount of time to procure pencils or procure art supplies, etc. And you learn from those experiences in terms of, staff need things that they to work, but they can't get them because, of course, you learn about some of these policies are late. And sometimes you have to make the sacrifice. I had to run out many times
Yeah.
to grab supplies. I know some programs may not have the opportunity to do that because of how your funding and the
Yeah.
restrictions that you may have. But that's key. And the staff also knew that without it being a pressure for them personally, but if they say, listen, we have these things that can be reused, it could be cardboard boxes or whatever it may be, they would take those supplies in. But that's key that you set the frame, I think, per week with them in terms of support. one thing I also did a lot was to, just give them little notes of appreciation. So to say,
Yeah.
hey, I appreciate you. I saw you when you did this with this kid, during the program, and I really want to let you know how much I'm happy that you're part of the team. So it's not just about the technical work of facilitating activities or providing homework help, or doing a session on financial literacy or whatever it may be, or serving, snacks or the evening dinner, but it's also, showing staff appreciation for just being present, but also the kinds of relationships that they build with students as well. That makes a
Yeah.
difference, for them.
I will echo the weekly check-ins
Mhm.
with any of my supervisors were a very important part of that process for me. Andrew talked in one of the previous questions about having those like 15-minute daily meetings with your team.
Mm.
For me, that often looks like showing up once a week at those meetings that my coordinators were holding,
Yeah.
and just being present so that people could share their complaints, concerns, thoughts, things they were excited about, and making sure that I was present and available for those. I think things like being willing to show up and do the nitty-gritty work, like Andrew's talking about going and picking up things, absolutely. But I will not claim that you never found me cleaning up throw up,
Yeah.
cooking dinner in the kitchen,
Wiping the tables. Yeah.
covering for a frontline staff member running a club or whatever it was. And I personally think like that made me better at my job because I knew what it looked like in the day to day.
Yep.
But I also think it helped my team feel like she's not just telling us what to do.
Mhm.
She's
Doing it.
knows what it takes to
Yeah.
do those things.
Mhm.
But I want to talk a little bit more about those meetings,
Yep.
right? Those one-on-one check-ins with those site coordinators. For me, those often looks like, okay, what's on your list for this week? What do you have going on? What needs to happen to make those things happen? And then what do we prioritize?
Sometimes I ask, what can I take from off your plate?
I know.
It's
That's
a
so
scary
it-
question to ask sometimes, but
yeah.
it's a real question because
See, I wrote it on my list.
Yeah.
What to take off.
That's it. And I love this because we're not just talking about supporting them professionally. We're talking about making sure that they feel comfortable and confident in like doing the job in their position, right?
Yeah.
Because we can train staff all we want, but if they don't feel comfortable and confident when it comes to delivering that content, then that can be a real sticking point.
It's real dealing with real people. I remember I had a staff member whose husband was in a motor vehicle accident, right?
Yeah,
and that was traumatic not only for her but also for the staff as well.
Of course,
And
yeah.
so we had to lean into her a lot more to figure out, okay, how do we navigate, how do we help her to navigate what's happening in her life personally, but also the plan she had for programming, how do we redistribute that? Or also how I had to step in to also help with that. Roll up my sleeves, roll up my shorts, because sometimes the shorts are programming, get out there, be on the basketball court with the kids, and just be a part, be in the middle of programming with them and support them. And that really made a difference for them. So that's key, and that only comes to having relationships where people feel comfortable being able to share, listen, I am struggling with this, or this has happened. And even when it happens, they're not pushing away to say, okay, you're the last person I want to be with me, walking through this difficult experience.
So speaking of that, because I love this topic, but I also kind of want to pivot because while we're talking about making sure that people feel like supported and comfortable, we are also in our current climate, we're sort of seeing a shift away from kindness and acceptance in education spaces. So how can we continue to do the really good work of supporting students and families in our affected populations while dealing with increasing constraints?
So, number one, our biggest responsibility, our greatest responsibility to youth and to families are to meet their basic physiological needs. And so start there. And number two is to create a safe place. If you're an educator, have been in education long, then perhaps you've heard us or someone else talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? those are the first two things that our young people need, right? They need to have their basic needs met, and they need to have a safe space where they're getting positive adults who are investing in creating that space. Um, there's a lot of political noise out there right
Mhm.
now. And I'm not saying to ignore it, but we need to be grounded in the places of what our kids need, what our families need, because that is
Mhm.
the piece that can drive us and that we can stay united in.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
as Hillary talks, I think of it on two hands. So in childcare services, in after school, in education, and other fields as well, a lot of us we're mandated reporters.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
are required to report where a child, is being abused or is experiencing is having experiences that takes away from, what we're expected to do, provide outsource for them. But as Hillary spoke, I also feel that we are first responders in an emergency situation, right? Education is in emergencies now. Our society is in an emergency situation. And so as an after-school program leader, program director, site coordinator, a frontline staff, whatever your role may be, we are all first responders. And by first responder means that how do we, as Hillary mentioned, how do we apply, care at this point or provide care at this point in time. And that may include, there's some people who may need a Band-Aid, but it doesn't stop there, you understand? Or some people may need an injection of support, some kind of social, emotional, physical support that they can get now. But I assume that, when a nurse or when a medical professional is about to give you an injection, they're softening you up, they are, and I know I'm drawing an analogy, but really that's what we're all called upon now to do, to really be first responders, to ensure that we provide the care, the support, get people to as safe a space as possible, or create a safe space for them, and reassure them that as we are hopeful that there is that in time better will come. You know, so what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And even if and that's it for many of our kids who come from homes or communities where there's so much crime and violence, and there's so much other issues that they're facing with. But when they come into a school space, or they come to after school space, they feel so safe,
Yes.
right? How do
Yes.
we maintain that safety for them as a first responder, right? On the front line for them. But how do we also give them enough for them to leave, to know that, listen, there are people who love and care for me, right? There are people who want me to be the best version of myself. And so they're giving their all. And so I'm confident that, I can overcome. And as such, because I can overcome, I can keep pressing on. So that's key. So now don't just see our roles as mandated reporters where things go bad, but serious as first responders now, providing that psychological, social, emotional safety, but also giving them the skills to be able to, make informed decisions now, but also to be problem solvers, working through this difficult time, but also to be resilient, to be able to make it through, to have grit, and to be able to press on, even though they may be experiencing difficulties.
Yeah, that's challenging. I mean, especially now, right? And so do you, I think that those are really helpful, actionable things that you can do, tomorrow in your program, right? Like show up, make sure those kids realize that there is a space where they feel loved and supported and welcomed. Um, can you think of any other recommendations that you might want to give right now before we move on? Because I know this is a hot button topic. So if there's anything that anything else that you guys want to add, or anything else that you could be doing to support maybe not just students, but families or even our staff during trying times like this. It's
Typically, just some of the approaches that even agencies like UNICEF, multiple agencies have taken when there's an emergency. There is a desire for us and we need to get to some of the academic portions of the work in just sport. But there are times we have to take a break and allow kids to be able to engage in arts and other kind of mentorship kind of activities that will help them to improve their skills, coping skills, essentially. So I'd say that those are things that you could do there for other students who depend on needs. It may be sports that helps them to be able to cope better. So they may be able to do some of those activities as well. So I'd say whether it's arts-based or sports or social emotional learning, And I say that. But whatever it is that will allow them to have the skills to cope. Sometimes we have to, it's about their readiness to learn. And sometimes they're not able to focus, concentrate on the math literacy because they're dealing with so much otherwise. And so we have to essentially, push that forward in terms of allowing them to be able to be psychologically, emotionally in a state of readiness for that. So those
Absolutely.
activities can help.
Absolutely.
I think I'll just add to it because you asked about staff.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Creating spaces to have those conversations as a staff, safe spaces for them, setting up spaces for respectful conversation, where you have hard conversations still, because these are hard topics, they're hard things that are going on. Having the hard conversations is important, and it's staff that work together, especially in spaces where you're working with families who and kids who come with their own challenges. I think build a sense of community that may be different than a lot of workplaces.
Yeah.
And so recognizing that that community is there and then using it to come around people who are on your team who are struggling, to create those positive places for conversation, and giving people resources is a huge part of that.
Yeah.
And that's going to look different in every context. It's going to look different depending on the dynamics within your team. It's going to look different based on even like your organizational culture. But it is important to create spaces for those conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I'm listening to you, and that's an amazing response and definitely something that's really important to think about. I wonder if we could take a moment to speak about how we could maybe use like family engagement opportunities to then support families, right? Because we talked about, wraparound services like UNICEF sharing resources and stuff like that. Is that something that we can also do with our families?
I'm going to say yes if you've done the culture work in the first
Yep.
Yeah,
place.
important.
I don't want to bring in 40 families who've never met each other to try and have these hard conversations about what's going on.
Yeah.
But if your program space is already a safe place for families, if it's already a place where families are engaged, then you may want to create spaces to have some of those conversations. And if it's not, if it's on that journey, like if you're headed there, start by having those conversations around like resources and needs with individual family groups.
Yeah.
So that maybe over time you can build to that place where you could have a larger conversation. And I would say the same with your team, right? It's why I said like how you do that is going to look different depending on your organizational culture. Very much the same for family culture, but there's, depending on what your families need, there may be very practical solutions that you can do with them. We were talking with a school district, now it's probably 2 months ago, where they were working on a plan with their out of school time staff and their school day staff around how they were going to support families who are immigrants in this current climate and culture. What resources could they give families? How are they going to make it accessible to them, and what languages? And so just thinking through things like that may be part of putting together a bigger plan around those kinds of supports.
But I think about it. I remember at a point in time when I was trained one as a youth advocate, but also training young people as advocates as well. And we talk a lot about the 3 R's: rights, respect, and responsibility, right? And that's going to be key as you're looking at those resources to be able to educate people about their rights. Not only now, but even as we move on to other phases, in our experience as a country, but also as a world. So teach them about their rights, but also that, listen, we have a responsibility. And so we want to be responsible at this point in time as well. How do I do that, right? And that comes from those resources as to what's available to me, right? And how I can take advantage of those. But I will also maintain my respect for the authorities and for the powers that be, but also for systems in place as much as possible. But also recognize that also I should be respected, and that's a basic a thing for me as a human being as well. And so
Right.
I ground a lot of what I do around the 3 R's, and I think the resources that we provide can also be aligned with that.
See, I think both of those components are huge, right? Doing the culture work and then making sure that everybody knows that all of their rights are respected, that they are being honored. And I think that goes so far to building an incredible community when it comes to like your families and making sure they engage with your programs.
Yep.
That being said, I'm sure that we've all been in positions where we're doing that work, but we still have a couple outlier families where we feel like they're being unreasonable.
Yeah.
They feel like their requests are very reasonable of us in some way, shape, or form, but we feel like those requests are unreasonable for us. So, can you give some recommendations for dealing with these trickier parents?
So I go back to the R about respect, right? Respecting their point of view is very important. It may be far removed from your point of view, but respect that point, but also giving them space. And one of the first things, depending on where you are now in your process, when I became a program leader or any other point in time, whether you are, a school leader or whatever, or even as a class teacher, you establish those systems in place to be able to have regular dialogue with your families, because people begin to rant and become more uneasy when they feel that information is being withheld from them, or that they're not being communicated with. And sometimes what happens is sometimes what we end up doing as programs is that we pass on information, we don't communicate, because if there's no space for them to respond to you, you're just transferring information.
Right.
But communication is really, there is transfer of two-way streams, right?
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there has to be meaning between us and making that meaning. So I'd say, one, give them that space to be able to share, right? And as you get that space for them to be able to share, be very open as to what is it that we can do to help you. Some of what they ask may be unreasonable, and so we may need to counter that, within the confines of our program, what we really can or can't do, right? But at least give them the space to share that, but able to say, listen, I wish I could do that, but really I'm not able to do that for you because of 1, 2, 3, 4 as to what our program policies are, but also what the systems are in place for our program, and just any other restrictions in terms of resources that you may have as well.
And Andrew, I always say to staff, to people who are dealing with those things, right? When there's an issue, it is parents' natural reaction in that, like, my role is to be my advocate for my kid to come up with an extreme request.
Yep.
Our role is to identify that moderate solution.
Yes.
And so that requires those clear boundaries that you're talking about. That requires a need for the parents to feel heard, giving them the chance to feel heard, to identify what the real issue is in the problem. Because sometimes what the apparent issue is not actually the heart of what's going on. I'm thinking about a family who we had 2 of their children in our program, and one of the children had a ton of food allergies, Andrew. And the mom would pack food every single day to avoid any potential food allergies in what we were serving in the menu. Great. So we were several weeks in, and at least once a week of them being enrolled, we were having to deal with an allergic reaction and had given EpiPens twice. And I was like, I don't know what's happening here.
Right.
And the parent didn't know what was happening and came in demanding that we eliminate all of the allergens from that entire facility. Now, the allergens included dairy, which all of our kids were eligible for food through the National Feeding Program. So we were getting summer food service program. You have to serve them milk. Like, that wasn't an option in the context, right? We have to give kids milk. And so that wasn't a solution. Then the demand was, well, my child can't be in the same room with any dairy. We said, okay, we can set aside a room for that. But then what the parent quickly discovered was that that child and
Yeah.
a staff member were eating lunch alone every day.
Mhm.
And that was also unreasonable.
Mhm.
And so the parent then wanted us to make other kids not have dairy to come have lunch with, right? That wasn't going to work. What we actually came to find out was that the child was developing a new allergy to something that the parent was packing in the lunchbox. But it took us being very intentional around documentation, processes, what we were doing, and what we couldn't do to help us identify that.
Mhm.
Because pretty much we were in the place where we were being accused of serving or providing or giving access to allergens, and that
Right.
turned out not to be what was occurring. But we couldn't tell that
Nope.
till we came up with a moderate solution, that separate room,
Mhm.
right? And walked through that process. And although there were the social issues that were the challenge of it did really help us address the issue. And when the parent figured out that they were providing the allergen,
Oh.
guess what? They were like, wow, like you all are a phenomenal part of this team.
Mm.
You've worked to help us identify this. Like we haven't been able to figure out what's happening in our program space. And so that's why going from that issue and that extreme
Yep.
request to finding that moderate solution, it's worth the work
Mhm.
because it builds that rapport,
Yep.
it impacts that culture,
Yeah.
it makes your program a safe space
Yeah.
because that family continued to send their
The
kids to our program for years because they knew we took allergens seriously and were willing to take them as seriously as we needed to.
Yeah. And that's what I had. I just in summary to say reassure parents,
Mhm.
reassure
Yeah.
families, right? We're here for you. We have your best interests at heart, and let's work on this solution together, right? But that really, as Hillary says, it's about starting with where the people are,
Yeah.
right? Start where they are, so you understand them, and move beyond just the surface to understand some of the deep-rooted issues that are probably affecting, causing them, to making the ask that seems unreasonable, and then working towards that moderate solution.
So as I'm listening to all this really useful information, it sounds like the common thread here is making sure that we have open lines of communication with parents. And when it comes to, engaging with families, there are a lot of districts out there, and I'm sorry in advance because this is a bit of a curveball because it's not on your list here, but it's something I thought of, right? We have a lot of programs where families, it's hard to get them together during like what would be typical family engagement times, right?
Mhm.
And use the normal venues to do that. So what advice would you have for programs to engage families that aren't available at those normal times? Like how can we still make sure they're included and we're still communicating with them?
Sometimes it's gonna take you having those activities very late
Mhm.
for people who are probably working, and they're coming off work at 7 and your program ends at 6. Some people end program ends at that. You may have to have a later family engagement activity for them. But as Hillary was talking, I remember there's one experience where we had a vehicle that took children home after programming, and there was families that didn't drive, and they just couldn't come to the program at all to talk to you.
Mm.
And why, we spoke for the phone. There were times I had to ride that van myself to
Yep.
that housing project and
That's
be able
it.
to see
Yeah.
and to meet with
Been there,
those
done that.
with those families. You understand? So that's key. It takes time, so you got to plan for that. You understand? But that's important again to reassure them, but to also meet them where they are at by going and seeing them there. Getting them involved. We had a family member who was a part of our program, our site committee, whatever you want to call it, steering committee. So they could also be a means of getting back information to the families, that also just be that voice to share with you anything that's important for them. So those are important. It may also mean weekends. Hillary will also talk, we get weekends, but also personally, I couldn't attend events on like Saturdays, but I had staff members who would go to the baseball games, the softball games, whatever it may be, just to be there and to hear and talk to families in a space that's different. Because sometimes when you're picking kids up from program, for those who do, it's a quick rush in, rush out. They have the next thing on their agenda and they don't have time. So it may mean sometimes also walking them out to their vehicles and having a conversation, that in the moment conversation as well, to learn more about how you can support them.
Yeah. You hit on a bunch of these, but Andrew, we did some really intentional things in my programs. We always staffed our sign in, sign out location. So whether it was the hallway in the building before you access the youth wing, whether it was the front door of wherever we were, we staffed it with somebody who knew what was going on in programs, who could have a conversation with those parents about their child, their homework, their whatever. And our staff knew that, like, through the night, through the after school programs, through the teen programs, whatever it was, they could text that person things like, so-and-so finished all their homework, or so-and-so did this really cool project they should show their parent, right? And that person could communicate those things to parents. At one program, that actually turned into something that we ended up calling Parents Cafe, but we put out tea and coffee at that check-in location, check-in, check-out location, and just said to parents, hey, like, if you want to hang out for 10 minutes before you pick up your kid, like, have a cup of coffee, have a cookie, like, you can have 10 minutes to be a mom, to be a dad without your kids, because they're running from work, they're picking up the kids, they're going to take them home, they're going to
Dinner,
whatever. And how often do those adults get time with other adults to have that space and time? And as we built that pattern of, hey, we do this on this day of the week, and parents came to really love that, we were then able to pull in additional supports like, hey, we have a pediatrician coming on this day who is happy to answer questions just real casually as you come through. So hang out. If you've got your question that you've been dying to ask your pediatrician, but you're afraid to ask, people loved that. And not just pediatricians, but all kinds of different people who would come in and be part of that. So that's number one. Number two, conversations with parents, texts, calls, and a pattern of them, especially when it's both good and bad and when it's two ways, is family engagement. Sometimes we don't give ourselves credit for that, or we don't think it's important. Now, you may need to track that for your reporting.
I was going to say that while Hillary, that make sure you have that parent communication log and foundations as a sample if you need one.
That's right.
Note every time you call a parent and you're talking about not only the bad things or when a child is hurt, but also call home to say, hey, Shaz did very well today. At lunch or break, right? And we want to affirm you for that. Or even if you just telling the parent while they're at programming, log that. It's important. Everything that you do, you want to put that in your parent log.
Yeah. So two things parents will always come for. Number one is food. Feed them. I know sometimes with finances, that's really hard. Find somebody to donate it. Number two, they will come if their kids are performing or showing off something and their kid wants them to be there. And so when you create those opportunities, those are great, like, easy entry things for parents that start that connection and allow you to start those, like, hey, texting conversations, hey, hang out and have more information input. Let me come and do a home visit conversations, right? All of those things that we want to get to go deeper with families. And then Andrew's absolutely right. Know when works for your families. One of my programs had a lot of hospital workers, so they at our local hospital worked 6 to 6 was the shift. So we needed to have all of our family engagement programming after 6 p.m. And we had a lot of it on Sunday mornings. And the reason for that was we also had a lot of agricultural workers. And so they work 6 days a week away, and then they're home on Sunday. That's when they can do things. And so we had a lot of Sunday morning 10 a.m. programs, and people would come, and I was always kind of shocked. but it was really good for our kids and for our families.
Yeah.
And so just knowing those
Yeah.
things about your community are important.
And also, nothing works better than using what I call existing activities.
Yeah.
So if it's an existing community activity or it's a housing complex, they're doing something there, open up the door, go there, be there. I remember doing a couple of those as well.
Yeah.
It took time, but just being there, talk people say, hey, I am the program leader here, etc. And they told you stuff that they desired, wanted to see in the program, but also things that they liked, things that they didn't like, etc. And that made a world of a difference in terms of incorporating their ideas into our programs.
Yeah, absolutely. Engaging with those community events is so key. I've gone to so many block parties for neighborhoods that I'm not even close to, you
Yep.
know, just because. I really love the emphasis on being intentional about that parent communication and making sure that, you know, we're engaging in ways that we know are going to be impactful. I kind of wanted to circle back because I feel like intentionality has been a theme that's been kind of like running through this, right? So as we come to the end of our time today, and again, please drop any questions that you might have in the chat for us, and we'll see if we'll get to them either now or in the next part of our series. But I was wondering if we could just talk a little bit about how we make sure that our staff is more intentional about the ways in which they engage with students, right? Because you run into some programs when we've done monitoring, you see programs and staff are sort of disengaged with students, and it seems like it's because there's not like an intentional like focus on how they're actually going to do that.
Yeah, I'd simply say that, you know, it starts with being clear as to what is your end goal for this activity, or even just about being in the space and engage with kids. So that could be formally as part of your activities or lessons, or it could be just about just so I'm going to be engaging them, even if they're in unstructured time, etc. And with that, how are the activities that you're implementing aligned to that, right? Because often we have the very nice plans and activities laid out, but when it comes to, you know, going through that, the activities are far removed from our goals. But we also haven't figured out how am I going to really determine, you know, how has this goal been met, or am I intentionally, you know, offering the activities? And so think about how am I going to assess whether this has taken place, right? What's going to be the work product? What is it that kids are going to be able to say, do, or build, or make, or whatever it is? That's going to let me know, yes, this kid got it. They've moved from point A to point B in developing this new skill, being able to do something that they weren't able to do before, or they're doing it at a higher level compared to what was that before. So that's simple from terms of and Hillary can add, but you know, having that goal, that intention activity, or you'll assess that, but also what's going to be the tangible product that helps you to know whether there's any movement or any progress.
So sometimes I had to go even more simplistic than that, Andrew. Especially with my teens and very young adults who've never worked with youth before. So I would say to my teens and young adults, you have three choices anytime you're in a room with kids. Okay. Number one, you are leading the activity. That means you are standing up, giving instructions, you are pitching the ball and kickball, like whatever it is, but you're leading that activity. Number one. Number two, you are actively assisting a kid, right? The kid says, I need more paint on my paper plate.
Give it to them.
You're getting the more paint and squirting it on their plate, right?
Sure.
You are actively assisting them. You're doing something they've asked for. Or number three, you are doing it with them. And I would say to them that if you're doing it with them, that means you are no more than an arm's length from them. Because there's nothing worse than you walk in the room, you've got the facilitator, maybe the adult, like running the thing, right? They're leading the activity. You've got tables of youth, of kids, right? And then you've got your teens all sitting at the table in the back.
Yep.
We've all seen that, right? That solved my problem, that you're either leading, helping, or doing the activity with the kids. Right? And that the arm's length. The arm's length matters.
Proximity is important.
So we can talk a lot more about that. You're definitely coming to the end of our time today. I do see that Donna dropped a couple questions in the chat here. Donna, don't you worry. Your questions will be the first two questions that we answer in part 2 of our Better Basics series. So please tune in. So that's going to be the 12th of March, and that'll be the second part of our Better Basics series. But just right now, as we come to the end of our time today, we're gonna put a survey link in the chat that we'd love you to fill out and let us know, how we did and how impactful this was for you. But also, feel free to share any more questions that you have so that we can follow up with them in the next part of our series. I do want to take some time to thank our incredible guests for today and the amazing information that they shared. Thank you so much, Andrew and Hillary. I'm sure that the information that you've shared has been incredible to me, and so I can't imagine how impactful it's been to the group that we have assembled here.
Chaz, I think Andrew and I would like to say one thing to the audience. If there's something that's not necessarily a question, but like a resource Andrew or I mentioned or something like that you would like to have, please send us an email, and I'm sure that they can drop those emails in the chat for
Absolutely.
everybody. But we love to get to talk to people. We kind of wish like
We
you were
enjoy it.
talking right back.
Exactly.
So
I thought we should try that next time where they ask the questions live. That'd be amazing. Yeah.
Donna,
Yeah.
come on.
Yeah,
Oh my
right.
God.
We'll work on it. And then, so in closing, I do want to mention that you'll have a certificate of attendance that will be emailed to you, but you have to make sure that you attended live, which you're here doing. So awesome, thank you. But also complete the survey that we dropped in the chat. You need to make sure that you do both of those things to make sure that you get your certificate of attendance, because we want to make sure you got the information. We want to make sure you get the credit for it. And so once again, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on the 12th of March for part 2.
That was great.
That was
so
great.
fun.
Bye, guys. Take care.